Oh,
Yes,
exactly.
absolutely. Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's now 11 a.m., so we will get started. For those just joining us, we have not started yet, so welcome. Your timing is impeccable. Um, the, the webinar today will be focusing on the economy. Our two speakers here above will be on momentarily. A quick introduction to the session. We are using Zoom and there might be some tech glitches, but if there are any issues, please feel free to call our office. If you're having issues, feel free to message your questions into the Q&A box at the very bottom of your screen. And our office staff will triage them up, and I will be asking the questions to the speakers. All participants are muted on entry into this call. And aside from that, I think we're good. So I'll pass it along to Minister Joyce Murray.
Well, thanks, David, and welcome. Welcome to our third MP Brunch Connections. And I just want to welcome David Freeland. You may not have chatted with him before or interacted with him through my office before, but David is a new staff person who is leading the office team in my MP office. So it's great to have you on board, David, and thanks for moderating this. So one of the things that has been really a good opportunity through doing Zoom meetings like the MP brunches is that each of our staff members have had an opportunity to train up on how to facilitate and support and use the technology. And I think that's part of what I like doing as an MP is providing opportunities for young people to grow their skill set. Again, welcome everyone, and I'm out at the airport. Vancouver Quadra is traditional territory of the Coast Salish, the Musqueams, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, as is the airport area. So if you see the background here, I'm in an airport meeting room, which is essentially a hotel room. And I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to have you join me for another MP brunch. And today we're talking about what are the kind of trade-offs that it takes to grow or to restart an economy after the incredible shock and challenges of the last number of months. So what are the policy trade-offs that we need to think about? It's not a straightforward matter. It's not like turning a key and the engine's going to go on and everything's going to be fine. So I'll introduce our special guest speaker, who you can see on the virtual screen in a minute. But I just wanted to take a moment to touch into updates from Ottawa, as I normally do. And so one is we're continuing to identify the kinds of supports that people need. As you know, this has been a very challenging time for everyone, and our government made the decision to really do everything we can to support people and to understand who was falling between the cracks and then create programs to support them. And so it's been a time of incredibly fast policy development and delivery of support to Canadians and employers and to groups that support the most vulnerable. And I've had the privilege of having an interesting role in that as the Minister of Digital Government, because a lot of the delivery of the programs, of course, is using information technology, and I'm the minister responsible for a big chunk of the information technology management and services for the Government of Canada. So I like to give an acknowledgement to the IT workers in the government and the digital people, the IT policy people, because sometimes they're the behind the scenes public servants, and they work very hard and have done a lot of long days and long weeks. So, and one of the things that is not imminent, but very soon we'll be launching our exposure notification app, which I have talked about before, I know, but it's something that is part of a toolkit that will help us restart our economy safely by having a way that you can be notified. If you have this app, it will tell you if you have been exposed to someone who tests positive. Anytime in the last 2 weeks, if you've had a certain exposure by being within proximity to a person who then tests positive, you'll get a notification of that if you download this app called COVID Alert. So it'll soon be available in the Apple App Store. We're just working through some last technical aspects of this, and the Canadian Digital Service has done a lot of the work to create this app. So that's been a fascinating learning curve for me as well. And the other thing that is related to our topic today, which is how we help restore and revive the Canadian economy and the BC economy. Another item is a recent announcement you may have been aware of, which is an agreement between the federal government and the 13 provinces and territories on a $19 billion fund of federal funding to help with the restart and help it be done safely. So why does it take weeks to get an agreement to receive money from the federal government, you might ask? But I think the intent that the government has was that this money would be used in certain ways that were most focused on what we've, as a federal government, felt were vulnerabilities to the reopening of our economies. And of course, provinces and territories, if they get a check from the federal government, they want to decide exactly how to use that and are not keen to have any constraints in that regard. So that's what the negotiations were about. And it was last week, I believe, that we came to a conclusion where there was mutual agreement that the money would be spent on things like safe childcare. So people that were not able to work because of looking after their children at home would have a chance to go back to work. For testing and contact tracing, which is different than the notification app I just talked about, but also a very important part of keeping Canadians safe as we reopen the economy. Personal protection equipment would be part of this agreement. Supporting vulnerable Canadians like seniors in long-term care facilities. Municipalities will receive some of this money to deliver their key services, which includes keeping transit going, because people need transit and it's been struggling without the revenues it's used to. And I think lastly, it's being used to support people who don't have paid sick leave through their employer or other means. This would provide some funding so everyone could have access to sick leave and not feel they have to go to work, even though they may, their health, it may be a bit dodgy. Now they need to stay home and will be able to be supported in doing so. So that's just a bit of update of what's going on in terms of supporting the provinces and the country in reopening and rebooting our economy and doing it in a way that is as safe as possible with respect to this pandemic. So I want to just leave it there because I want to have as much time as possible for the subject of our meeting today, and I'm very grateful that Professor Michael Devereux, who's a professor at UBC and a former director of the Vancouver School of Economics at UBC. He has a great deal of expertise in international economics. Was born in Great Britain, in Dublin actually, and came to Canada several decades ago. He's had positions at U of T and Queen's University. From 2003 to 2013, he was a Bank of Canada Research Fellow and has had visiting positions at many universities across Asia, Europe, and the United States. Was a consultant for the US Federal Reserve, the International Monetary Fund, and the Bank for International Settlements. So Michael, in 2010, received the Canadian Economic Association's John Ray Prize for the economist with the best 5-year track record in Canada. And he's currently a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and at the Centre for Economic Policy Research in London, UK. So what a great range of perspectives to be able to weave together to understand the key elements of what we need to do here for opening Canada's economy safely. So thank you so much, Dr. Devereux, for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Joyce. It's very nice to be here. So, okay, so I should try to share screen. I think I need to share screen again. So, okay. 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 Can everyone see my slides now? Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you very much for the very nice introduction. I'm happy to be here. My name is Michael Devereux. I'm a professor at the Vancouver School of Economics at UBC. And today I'm going to talk about British Columbia's economy and the COVID-19 crisis. Okay. Now I'm trying to, oh, okay, yeah, this works. Let's start, right at the beginning. What kind of experience do we have now relative to, the historical crises and historical events in the world economy and the Canadian economy? What I would stress is that this is completely unprecedented, this economic crisis. That one of the features about it is that it's impacted on literally every country in the world at the same time. So this is probably, in our lifetime or the lifetime of our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, that, the biggest kind of global shock that's hit really every country. Now, from the point of view of Canada, we're 6 months into the crisis now. It dates back to late January, early February. So where are we now? Now, we could maybe conjecture that, BC and Canada may be past the worst of the crisis. We're on the downward track in terms of infections and death rates. But what I want to stress, and I'll kind of go through a few pictures to show you, is that we're in this situation of huge uncertainty. And there's kind of two elements to the uncertainty. There's uncertainty about health, there's medical uncertainty. We have to think about a second wave, which is a really a major risk, whether we'll get a vaccine or not. And particularly spillover from the US, which is, very close to us, our most important trading partner, and the US is in a very different situation than us at the moment. So that's medical uncertainty, but there's huge uncertainty about the economic recovery as well, because given the scale of the economic crisis, an instant recovery is really not on the table at all. There's risks of, continued unemployment, business failures, a huge increase in public debt, and, basically the return of the global economy. The global economy is almost shut down in the last 6 months. So the outline of my talk, I'll try to cover all these points here, is I want to first of all document the scale of the economic collapse, just to kind of get a sense of scale and perspective. Then briefly discuss the policy responses that have been followed in Canada. Then I'm going to kind of jump to the current situation, like where are we now in terms of the disease risk and the economic risk. Then talk a little bit about the requirements for a successful recovery, and then hopefully, if I have time, finish upon, with some questions about the long-term effects of the crisis. I mean, given the magnitude, scale, and seriousness of this crisis, it's likely to have really long-term effects on the Canadian economy and Canadian society. Okay, so first of all, let me just discuss, the events and what's happened since February and March. In March 16th, BC declared a state of emergency. So we saw this immediate closure of schools, bars, restaurants, and all non-essential businesses that couldn't be retained by remote working. And the federal government and other provinces took the same measures almost simultaneously. So what was the impact on the economy? Well, we saw immediately a dramatic fall in Canadian GDP, which is the measure, the overall measure of the Canadian economy's income and production. And what I want to stress is that this is unlike anything in recent history. So if we just look at this graph, this is Canadian GDP growth at monthly frequency. So each point here is the monthly growth rate, and it goes from February 2008 to June to April, I think May 2020. So this point right here is what we now somewhat kind of funnily called the Great Financial Crisis, which, if we remember, was in 2008, 2009, this big financial crisis that hit Canada and many countries. So we had a recession there. Look at our current recession. It's just completely off the scale. So the fall in Canadian output, Canadian production is something we've never, ever seen before. Look at the scale of the job losses. Between February and April, the Canadian economy lost about just over 3 million jobs. Not just in scale, but in character, the recession was very different from any other recessions. So if we look at, the recession of 2008 or the recession of the early 2000s or before, normal recessions are caused by external shocks like rise in oil prices, financial crisis, or a big increase in world interest rates, something like that. This was quite different. This was what we call an induced recession. It was induced by the confinement policies, by lockdown policies, and essentially reduces supply in many, many sectors of the economy. And in addition, it hit sectors very differently than the normal recession. It hit sectors of the economy where face-to-face interaction is more important. So in retail sales, food and accommodation, the service sector. But unfortunately, the service sector is the biggest part of most economies now. We think of production as manufacturing and resources and so forth, but most employment is actually in the service sector. So if we look at the BC economy, we see this huge fall in employment in the service sector, in the arts sector, in sectors which require face-to-face interaction. And this is why it's been such an important, such a big shock for BC and Canada. If we compare that to the recession of 2008, 2009, most of the shock hit manufacturing, natural resources, and it was much, much smaller. And these sectors are much less important in terms of total employment. So that kind of gives us a sense of the scale of things. How about policy responses? Well, I mean, we tend to think of policy responses along two dimensions. First of all, there was the immediate health policy responses, which were the lockdown policies. And these were quite successful compared to other jurisdictions in their immediate objectives. So we, in quote unquote, flattened the curve. So if we compare Canada versus the US in terms of the infection rates, we see that Canada has so far done much better than the US in terms of new daily infections. This is from Worldometer's data on daily COVID infections. We can see the US is going in a very different trajectory than Canada. We see the same thing in terms of daily death rates. Canada has reduced this very significantly. The US is quite different. So that's on the health policy response. The problem, though, is that when we have these lockdowns, as I showed you a few minutes ago, we had 3.5 million jobs lost. So this without any economic policy response would have led to a huge increase in poverty. People would lose their income, and we have a situation of mass poverty. So the government responded to this by basically replacing the income lost with large transfers and loan guarantees. So we had this basically spaghetti soup of new transfer programs. The most important was the Canadian Economic Response Benefits, the CEORB, but there was also the Canadian Wage Subsidy, the Canadian Student Benefit, and other things. So I'm going to show you the scale of these in a second, but how are these financed? By a big increase in government borrowing. So governments borrowed in order to replace this income, this big lost income. Just to look at the scale of this, this is from the Department of Finance's recent statement. They estimate that about 45 billion was the scale of the labor income lost because of the loss of employment and the lockdown policies. The total special transfers were actually larger than that, about 65 billion, because they covered not just direct income loss, but they covered other losses that were likely to be kind of caused by spillovers into the economy. So how successful was this? Well, it turned out that it was really very successful in eliminating the specter of poverty. So if we look at the aggregate data here, the blue line is household income in Canada. The red line is household expenditure. And I don't have completely up-to-date data for this, but for the first quarter, which is the first 3 months of 2020, we see that household income, or disposable income as it's called in the national income accounts, didn't fall at all. Where household spending fell significantly, basically because people didn't have things to spend on, so households ended up saving quite a bit. But we can see that the transfer policies were very successful in terms of replacing lost income. So we had, quite differently from other recessions where we had big increases in poverty, we've had a very negative effect on the real economy, but we haven't had a mass increase in poverty. We haven't had hunger. We haven't had lots of people losing their homes or their domiciles. However, there is a flip side to this, and that is in terms of government government finances. So if we look at this, we see that the federal government deficit was scheduled to be about minus 1.5% of GDP in 2019-2020. It went up by a magnitude of 10 times. It's now going to be about 16% of GDP. So there's been a massive increase in government borrowing to finance this. The government debt to GDP ratio, that is the overall amount, that net amount that the federal government owes relative to the production or income of the economy, is likely to increase by about 20%. So it's going from 30 to 49%, according to the Department of Finance estimates. So this, this looks pretty serious, but I would stress a couple of things. First of all, the debt is still quite low by international standards. So the US debt to GDP is much higher than this. Many other European countries have much higher debt loads than this. So this is big, but it's still sustainable. The second thing I would say is that, currently debt service is quite manageable because of very, very low current interest rates. Okay, let me switch now to the current situation. So that is really what happened in the first 3 months of the crisis. Where are we now? Well, employment bounced back in June. So if we look at the BC employment situation, we see lots of the jobs that were lost in April bounce back in the June labor force survey. So this is data from really the mid to late May. We don't have updated data for June and July, but it's basically towards the end of May. We see that a lot of the retail jobs that were lost in the early period of the crisis did come back. So we're kind of maybe halfway back in terms of jobs. But the fact is that BC did lose about 400,000 jobs, and so we might be back halfway through that at the current situation, or a little bit more. We don't have the full data yet. But what I want to stress is that we're still way below normal. So we can look at some indicators to emphasize this. Let's look at Google mobility data. So this is really interesting. Anybody can access this just on the internet. Google mobility data looks at Google map searches that are based on particular dimensions of activity. So we see, retail activity, grocery, transit, work, residence. So we can see that, as the crisis hit, and this is for British Columbia, as the crisis hit, these map searches related to work, related to transit, related to retail, they fell off a cliff, literally. There was a huge drop. Now, if we look around here, this is where we entered phase 3 of the reopening. Now, some things have risen, but we can see we're nowhere back to normal in terms of retail activity, work activity, or transit. So we still have I think, a long way to go. A similar picture can be seen if we look at open table restaurant bookings. So we can see that, again, as the crisis unfolded, restaurant bookings went to zero. That is minus 100% relative to restaurant bookings in 2019. So this gives the change relative to the analogous time in 2019. We can see that, we've started to open up. This is Toronto, this is Vancouver. Restaurant bookings are open up. But again, we're still nowhere near back to a completely normal situation. So from this, I would conclude that this recession is likely to persist for a very long time, essentially until the disease risk is eliminated itself. Now, I want to emphasize kind of two concepts which economists are using to understand the current situation. The idea of supply shocks and demand shocks. So, in March and April, we had what we think of as a supply shock. The federal government and provinces issued orders for many businesses to close down because of the risk of the viral risk. So we're essentially reducing the supply of goods and services and all kinds of sectors in the economy. Now, one might think that, okay, as long as we kind of reopen, we can just go back to normal. But that's not the case. And that is because we have demand shocks as well. And that demand shock idea comes from the response of households and firms. And that is kind of a secondary fall in market activity because households stop buying, firms stop investing because of the risk, the viral risk itself. Now, the Bank of Canada in recent publications estimate that this demand shock, this kind of second spillover response from households and firms and other sectors in the economy is at least 40% of the overall response. So the lesson is that, you know, even if we did not have the lockdowns, even if governments did not issue these orders to shut down restaurants, to shut down bars and so forth, we would have had a big recession anyway, because really there's no trade-off between the economic effects and the viral effects. If the viral effects are there and there's huge risk, then people are going to stop going to work, they're going to stop buying. We're going to have this big economic crisis in any case. So the lesson is really the economy cannot recover until we squash the viral risk. And for some additional evidence for this, look at the US states now that have really not locked down. Their viral caseload has been going up and up, and their economies are going down, not from direct policy, just from people's actions. So what about policies for recovery? What have we got, David? So how much? Okay. Okay, so I'm kind of running out of time here. Let me just finish up very quickly. What I would suggest is there's likely to be very long-term effects of this crisis, what we, economists call scarring effects. There's going to be business failures. Some sectors are going to be very slow to recover. And some sectors, maybe the travel sector, will recover almost never. I mean, we're going to have really permanent effects on these. International trade, the Canadian economy is incredibly integrated in the world economy, in the US and Europe and Asia. International trade has collapsed. This is going to take a long time to recover. My own sector, the education sector, is going to be very badly hit by travel restrictions. Now, what I would suggest, and what Minister Murray has mentioned at the beginning of today, is that, we're going to need continued government support, for low-income groups whose jobs do depend on face-to-face contact. There's going to be much more support for those, both to income replacement, plus to make sure that they can return to work in a safe environment. I think that the type of government support will have to change. There's need to be kind of direct stimulus spending and not just income transfers. We're going to see some persistent government deficits, I think, for several years. Let me just finish with one plug for the Vancouver School of Economics COVID-19 response. So I'm not going to explain this, but I would encourage you to go to the Vancouver School of Economics website, and there they have what they call a risk tool, which is to look at all the different sectors in the BC economy by the size of the sector and the viral risk involved in those sectors. So it was devised so as to help the BC Centre for Disease Control and the provincial government to design reopening policies for the province. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Professor Devereux. We'll move into the question and answer period of the session now. The first question is directed to Professor Devereux. Would it be strategic to lower taxes at a time like this, or should we keep taxes the same for the time being until the borders and the economy are fully opened up? This is from Patty in Vancouver Quadra.
I think that the tax question of lowering taxes is a secondary one. I don't think it would be at all important as a direct response at this time. What we're seeing is that the savings rate has gone up in the economy. Many people who retain their jobs are not liquidity constrained. In fact, most people who have retained their jobs, such as me, and people who can work from remotely and are doing a lot of saving. So reducing taxes is not really going to help the economy very much. I mean, people are not really cash constrained. In addition, many people have lost their jobs, and so reducing taxes is irrelevant for them because they're really, not they don't have employment income. So what was necessary clearly at the beginning of the crisis was a large-scale transfer program, because we basically took 20% of the labor force out of employment, so that eliminated their income. That income had to be replaced so that they could maintain the basic necessities of life, like food and rental payments and so forth. So I don't think reducing taxes at the moment would have really any first-order impact on the economy. What I would say, though, down the road is that given the increase in government debt, that we are likely to be facing higher taxes in the years or decades to come, especially among the higher income groups in Canada. And I think that's a fair a fair development, because the higher income groups, or the groups who did not lose their employment status in this crisis, and they're essentially saving a lot, so it's only fair that they do help to repay some of this, these transfers that have gone to the people who actually made the sacrifices during this time. So.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is for Minister Murray as well as Professor Devereux. This is from Dean in Vancouver Quadra. How do you interweave reopening the economy and building a sustainable future at the same time? Maybe we can get Minister Murray to go first.
Well, I'll start by saying I think the most important aspect of that is to have the strong intention to utilize the situation to accelerate our transition to a clean and green economy. And that's certainly the conversations that we're having in government. And we have some strong targets, net zero by 2050. We had a certain set of policies, like putting a price on carbon, that would get us a chunk of the way to that target, with interim targets in 2030. And we're utterly committed to achieving net zero. So this is, I think this does give an opportunity to really refocus or focus some of our policies, our industrial policies, and our support policies, to make sure that we do achieve those targets and we accelerate the work to achieve a green economy, and one that doesn't leave anyone behind. So a green economy that also thinks about the jobs for those whose livelihoods will change based on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So we're committed. What the exact policies are right now, that's being discussed and formulated. So Michael, I'm eager as to your thoughts on that.
Well, I would make two general points. I am not going to discuss the details of policy, first of all, because that's not something I have a kind of special knowledge or expertise in. But the first point I would make is that, we have suffered a huge crisis. There's no doubt about that, both domestically and globally. And we do have an opportunity now to kind of redesign in many ways the way our economy works and the way our society works. One lesson that I think, one great lesson that has been learned of this crisis is the role of governments, that we can suffer this unbelievable shock, this unprecedented historical collapse in the economy without a big spike in poverty, that the government reacted very, very quickly. And, we've managed to essentially not have a great degree of suffering. I mean, I don't want to be blasé about it. Of course, many people have suffered, and we've had a huge problem. We've had a huge health crisis, but we have not had secondary economic suffering. So that's one thing. So I think that underlies the possibility that the role of government down the road in the future to correct economic problems, to direct the progress of the economy along many sectors, including, and probably most importantly, the green economy, has now, I think, been underlined and emphasized by this crisis. So that's kind of an optimistic view of what Canadian governments, both federal and provincial, can do. But on the pessimistic side, let's look at the international system. So, you know, back in, honestly, my dates are a bit fuzzy now. When the Paris Accord was signed, I think it was 2015, we had a lot of optimism about a global response to, to the climate crisis. That optimism has been, torn away in the past 3 or 4 years by policies of many governments. I'm not going to name them all, but that really underlies a huge overall message that I have seen as, given my own speciality on international economics. We haven't had any kind of, clear global leadership come out of this crisis. In previous crises, in the 2008-2009 crisis, we did have global leadership. We, G20 governments got together. They responded to the crisis. There was lots of sharing of policies and information and global coordination. Unfortunately, we're not in that situation now. So, I would hope that over the next year or a number of years, as we come out of this health crisis, that we'll see an increase in the possibility of global leadership, particularly on the climate crisis, but also in other dimensions, in restoring the global system, the global trading system, and so forth. We're not there now, unfortunately. But so that kind of my answer then is twofold. We did good things in Canada, but we're seeing, poor developments internationally. So.
Thank you very much, both of you. The next question is from Allison in Vancouver Quadra. With so many governments, including Canada, borrowing to finance these massive payments over the past few months and the upcoming months, who are they borrowing from and on what sorts of terms? And this is to both Minister Murray and Professor Devereux. Minister, would you like to go first?
Well, actually, I'd like to hear what Professor Devereux has to say about that, because I have my own question that I'm going to tag onto the question that you just read out. So, yeah.
Well, essentially, the governments are borrowing from you and me. I mean, the country as a whole is saving a lot. I think I just showed a picture of household disposable income and household expenditure, and the difference between those two things are household saving. So, we're doing a lot of saving. The government is issuing government bonds, and we're not directly buying them, but we're saving in banks, and the banks are buying them. The Bank of Canada is intervening significantly in the economy. Now, this clearly will have long-term implications. Government debt doesn't come for free, so this debt will have to be repaid down the road. But the key burden of the debt, or the burden of government debt, becomes extreme in a situation where the debt service ratio, where the need to pay interest on this debt starts to grow dramatically relative to the tax revenue that the economy, that the government collects. That debt service ratio is very, very low at the moment because of really very, very low, almost zero interest rates. So the government can borrow now at long-term bonds, at 10-year bonds, for less than 1%. Now that means that, you know, they do have to pay interest on this debt, but it's a very low interest rate at the moment. So that the debt burden at the moment is not something to be significantly alarmed about. But you know, it's certainly a serious question. But the second point I'd make is, and I think I made it in during my slide presentation, is that the Canada's debt ratio, which is the ratio of federal government debt to GDP, is actually the lowest among G7 countries. So we did have what's called in economics terms, quote unquote, fiscal space. We had space to increase our borrowing in order to respond to this crisis. If you look at some other countries, so for instance, Italy, the debt to GDP ratio in Italy started at the beginning of the year at about 130%. So, you know, about 4 times that of Canada. So we're in a better situation than other countries with respect to government debt.
So the question that I wanted to ask Dr. Devereux is, what kinds of policy thinking or understanding do you want to share with us with respect to the issue of inflation? How do, if what we've been doing as a government is in a way quantitative easing, how do we avoid the potential pitfall of runaway inflation?
Well, you know, there has been some discussion about the risk of inflation, because really, you know, what the Bank of Canada is doing is, you know, this quantitative easing. They're purchasing lots of bonds and government bonds, long-term bonds, short-term bonds, and other financial instruments. So in a sense, you know, that's like creating money. It's not literally cash, it's digital money. But that money really is not being spent in the economy. It's being held by the banking system in terms in Bank of Canada deposits. Now, if all this money was to suddenly be spent and people would try to spend it, then that would raise lots of inflationary pressures. Right now, we're actually seeing the opposite. That spending is very, very low. People are saving a lot. We don't really have any inflationary pressures. If anything, we have the opposite at the moment. The Bank of Canada has a 2% inflation target. We're way below that target at the moment. So the new governor, Macklem, did commit in his speech in early July to restore that 2% inflation target as we exit the crisis. But we'll probably be, you know, at least a year or maybe 2 years before we get to that. Now, that's kind of the first response. The second response is that, you know, the Bank of Canada, given that it has a target, they have tools to respond to inflation. So if we had, you know, big inflationary pressures coming over the next, I personally, I don't think that that's a big risk. But if that happened, if people started, you know, spending a lot of this new money creation so that we had a lot of inflation pressures, the bank has tools to respond to that. It can raise interest rates, and by raising interest rates, it tends to dampen the inflation pressures. So, you know, personally, I have to say, as an economist, I'm not very worried about the inflation risk.
Great, good to hear.
Excellent. So the next question is to, again, Minister Murray as well as Professor Devereux, from AJ in Vancouver Quadra. AJ says, thank you both for being here. Wondering if you can discuss the civil unrest in the United States of America and potential impacts on BC/Canada, particularly in light of COVID-adjacent nature of protest activity and potential impacts on short and long-term trade.
Okay,
Well, I'll just respond, but not so much about trade, more about um, my experience of what's going on in the United States and just how that's also an issue here in Canada. I mean, we've seen some of these examples of systemic racism and frankly, police brutality against Indigenous people and people and Black people that is completely unacceptable. And so I think it is almost a positive side benefit of this difficult time that we are seeing more clearly our, if you will, unconscious biases. We're seeing the RCMP having to really wrestle with what's going on within their organization and their ranks, and start to recognize what hasn't been so clearly recognized in the past in terms of these biases. And the stats are very clear that that there is differential treatment for people of color, for Black Canadians, Indigenous Canadians, when it comes to connection with police and our justice system. And so we are looking at that as a government and very concerned and very committed to addressing this in our society. Simply not acceptable. I think it's positive that it's being highlighted, especially by what's going on in the United States. And you can expect to see some measures coming out of our government to directly address the structures in our society that have held this in place. I don't know how many on this call were at the previous brunch, and I was really shocked when I heard that there was a prime ministerial order in council to ban Black people from coming across the border from the United States into Canada. Overt racism and discrimination that actually informed our border measures for many decades. So that is, it was shocking to hear how out front that was, and that has been a foundation creating some of the discrimination that Black people are still experiencing today. And we just have to we have to fix that, and we have to change that.
Okay. So my response to the question would be more on the trade side. I mean, I have, you know, I certainly find the unrest in the U.S. a very upsetting, very upsetting series of events, and of course I completely agree with what Minister Murray's description of the situation and the worry about the situation in Canada. But you know, my opinions really are just a layperson's. You know, from the point of view of my own speciality, what I worry about is the trading system. I think that there are really long-term threats to the international system on the trade side. I mean, if you look at Canada's success over the last number of decades, a lot of the success has been because we have, you know, become more integrated in the international system. Our trade with many countries has gone up. So that's provided many, many new jobs, a huge increase in the welfare and the income of Canadians. Now that really is under threat and has been even before the COVID crisis because of the trade war between the US and China and the problems that we've had in restoring the NAFTA agreement and trade frictions between the US and Europe. Now, what I really worry about is that as the recovery, hopefully as the recovery gets underway, many countries are going to be much more protectionist in their trade policy. That, you know, that is kind of putting on exclusionary tariffs and quotas and trade restrictions to try to jumpstart their own countries at the expense of other countries, what's called in economics parlance beggar thy neighbor policies. So that, I think, is a real risk in the future. And you know, just to get back to my discussion of a few minutes ago, you know, what we really need here is global cooperation. Now, I think the sentiment for global cooperation is there in many countries, certainly in Canada, but I think, you know, that's not shared in all jurisdictions. So hopefully we will get there as things unfold over the next year or two. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much, both of you. Because we're getting close to time, I'd like to pose one more question, but maybe we can get a rapid response from both of you. So the question is from Jane in Vancouver Quadra. At this time, is the case for a basic income a strong one? And maybe we'll start with Minister Murray and then flip to Professor Devereux.
Well, I've enjoyed seeing the uprising of interest in basic income. The CERB was functioning somewhat like that. And I think it's a very important potential policy to explore for Canada, because we really want to focus on the most vulnerable and reduce the gap between those who are have enough and those who don't, by lifting up those who don't. What I would say that is in a federation like Canada with for example, provinces like Quebec, when we saw how much work it took just to get agreement on us providing $19 billion to the provinces for some specific targeted measures, it is very contentious to have the negotiations with the provinces and territories who have the majority of responsibility for social supports. And so there is a very complex social safety network right now that would have to be really reconstructed to do a basic income. And so it's a big project. It will take a while to work through it. And but I'm interested in seeing work get started on that at this time.
Okay, so I think I have 1 minute to respond to this. Two things. First of all, this is not really my bailiwick. My colleague, David Green, who is actually leading the VSE response to the crisis, has been working for the BC government on a basic income policy. So it would be worthwhile sending questions to him or emailing him to get better insights. But what I would say is that my understanding of a basic income project is that it has this concept of universality. And I think that is a costly way to redistribute income. I don't need a basic income. You know, I'm paid by UBC, and you know, a basic income would not be necessary for me and many other people who have steady and permanent jobs. So I don't see it as well directed. What I think is important is redistribution towards the poor, towards Indigenous populations, towards marginalized or unemployed people. A basic income, as I understand it, just gives income to everyone. I just don't think that's a good way to achieve necessary redistribution.
Excellent. Thank you very much, both of you. Minister Murray, to you.
Okay, well, these hours just go so quickly. So, Michael, thank you so much for bringing your perspective and research and understanding of economic matters and international economic matters to this discussion. And you had a great slideshow that was also succinct and allowed us to have a more fulsome Q&A period than we sometimes do, and that's really appreciated. So I want to thank you. I want to thank David and the team who organized the logistics of this. and of course to thank all of the participants, because that's what makes these conversations possible, the fact that you join us and that you engage with your questions. So thanks so much, and I want to wish everyone safe and enjoyable summer, and we will restart this program in September. And here is a poll in front of you now, and we'd love to have your thoughts on our restart, our economic restart for the Canadian economy. So thanks.
Okay,
and,
thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much, both of you. And if folks can take a moment to answer the poll, that would be amazing. So far, I see we've got just about 30 responses, which is fantastic. And they just keep going up. So we're almost there. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day ahead.